If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave us feedback, you can contact us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or find us on Facebook at facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. If you like the content and want to hear more of the show, subscribing will ensure you don't miss an episode. New episodes come out almost every Wednesday. Also, please review, tell a friend about the podcast, or share with your gaming group. Now sit back and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, where we discuss the various ways to make your tabletop role-playing experience better, either for your players or for you as the game master. Hello, I'm Josh, and joining me this week, I've got DJ. DJ is a friend of mine. He is a member of the Tuesday game that we've talked about. And the reason I'm bringing him on today, DJ is the former head of Sparks Force 7, a living D6 Star Wars game that was very popular in the Midwest. And he now runs a living Genesis system game that is set in Weird World 2 called OSS 42 that he runs at Gen Con and at local conventions in Illinois and Wisconsin. We have actually play tested some of those episodes on the Tuesday night game. Welcome, DJ. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, I thought it'd be fun to get additional DM's perspectives, especially about games that other people may not be as familiar with, or even game styles that people are not familiar with. But I would like to start this off with, who are you? What are you bringing to the table?
All right.
Specifically, I'd like to know, when were you introduced to tabletop games?
I was 11 years old at a Boy Scout campout, and somebody brought a second ed D&D book. And we spent 2 days not knowing what we're doing, and our highlight was being killed by a camel. And I was hooked.
Fantastic. And you've been gaming ever since?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah? Any particular game systems stand out to you? I know, you've talked about the D6 Star Wars system, and we're going to talk about the Weird World War II OSS Genesis system. What else has been, unique or weird or fun?
Like most people, I started off with Dungeons and Dragons, and
It is the king for a reason.
Spelljammer. Yeah. When it showed us Spelljammer, it was like, oh my god, we can be space pirates. That was cool. And then, as I got older and more diverse, somebody introduced me to Shadowrun, and I spent a decade playing Shadowrun until the point it was like, I don't know what to do anymore with this game system because we'd attacked it from every single angle there is.
Mhm.
And I have a soft spot for 7th Sea, any sort of weird World War II style game like Achtung Cthulhu, or Pinnacle had a Weird War system for a while. Godlike is another, it's World War II is supers, any of that stuff. If I can sniff it out and get a game of it at Gen Con or something, I'm there.
So what hits you better, a good story or a good setting?
So I feel like they're hand in hand, right? The setting draws you in and the story keeps you there, right? I'm not the guy who cares about mechanics, right? You're never going to wow me with ooh, this is really cool the way these feats match. I don't care about that, right? I want to feel like I'm in that universe, in that IP, and I want to be able to have a great story to follow through that.
Oh, nice. And then last on your role-playing history, what's your go-to character class? Regardless of system, what do you like?
I've grown to like. I started off as the guy I always wanted to be the blaster, right? Ranged attack, everything. As I've developed, I find that I actually enjoy the support characters more.
Yeah,
Be just competent enough in a fight that you're not going to get yourself killed and have something to do, but being the guy that knows everything tends to be a lot more fun and useful.
I have to agree with you there. The Swiss Army knife is absolutely the best character to play. But I think that's also very much something that comes out when you've been, game mastering for a while, is that you tend to take all the different roles when you're running things. So when you get to actually play, You don't want to give up all that control. What do you think? Is that crazy? Okay. So you had come to me. I was asking, like, who would like to talk, and you said that you'd like to talk today about something I haven't really experienced in the wild, either as a game master or even as a player. I've wanted to, but it always ends up, something else is happening, and that is something called a living campaign. Can you tell me what is a living campaign?
So a living campaign, let's define a home campaign first, right? As a
Mm-hmm.
reference point. A home campaign is you got the same group of people, the same dungeon master or game master every week. And you level up that character and you follow through the campaign or plot, what have you. A living campaign is a shared world with multiple game masters, and the players and the table makeup varies from session to session. It's very common at game conventions, Gen Con, Origins, or small local cons. Around here, we have things like CodCon and things such like that. And so they're usually 4-hour slots, and you show up and someone schedules it, and you can play a game of character. And you don't have to play them in order. You almost can't play them in order, right? Because of the table makeup and there's so many games out there. But your character shows up, you play your adventure, and then you level up that character and you run off to the next slot, whether that's immediately after or 6 months later. The GM might change, all the other players might change, but that's the fun.
So when I was reading through about living campaigns, the first thing that popped in my head was Adventure League for D&D.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider that a living campaign?
Yes, Adventure League, Pathfinder Society, and Shadowrun Missions are basically the three big corporate living campaigns.
So they don't have to come from your standard everyday homebrew style GMs. They can come prepackaged for the masses, like so
Yes.
many styrofoam containers.
And by volume, Pathfinder Society puts everyone to shame. Like,
Yeah.
there's a huge following there. I don't have the numbers for this, but basically, like, just looking at the Gen Con program booklet, they're probably 70% of the market share. Like, they're that huge.
Awesome. Where can I find one of these games to play in?
So, any large gaming convention, Gen Con, Origins, Dragon Con, and so on, will have these at them. You just register for the convention, and then you can sign up for the game as long as you get tickets. The local conventions.
No?
Sorry, what was that?
I was just wondering, you've got them at local conventions too?
Yes. And that's a little harder to find because you got to know where the local conventions are. And local conventions have not bounced back post-COVID.
Yeah.
And so that's a much harder activity. But they do still exist. In the Midwest, you've got CodCon, which is in the spring. You've got Polar Vortex, which is in like February or so. There's one in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, that's pretty large. GaryCon, which I think is in Madison. So like these places exist. You just got to sniff out for them, and a little more effort to find them. But
GaryCon this year was actually in Lake Geneva, back in the spring. I did not know it was happening when I showed up there for a weekend with my wife, who was rather annoyed that I was like, "Ooh, gaming." So
yeah, I have not actually gone to that one, but I know people who have run a Sparks, which is the D6 living campaign there.
Yeah.
They
Okay.
have a presence.
Are they difficult to join as players, or is it just like come one, come all?
So for the most part, they are very welcoming. The catch being is there is a wide disparity in level at a table. It's less an issue for the D&D style games because they specifically say, be within, 4th or 5th level to play this event, right? But when you play like the Shadowrun or Star Wars ones, like those are level-less systems, and so you can have someone show up that's played 100 sessions, sit next to a player. This is their first game, and if the experienced guy is, kind of rude about it, I mean, he'll just overshadow any other player at the table. That's always something I look out for, both as a GM and as a player. Like my characters are very experienced, and I go out of my way to sit back and let the more experienced newer play or less experienced newer players, you know, feel the show because I want them to have a good time and I want them to come back because I want new people to play with. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. So what you're saying is that you're coming in with sort of a character of your own, something that's been approved for that that living world.
Right. So every system has its own creation guidelines. Most of them will have templates. You show up and like they'll just like here's a character. Give yourself a name. Maybe spend a small amount of XP to modify it, and you're usually ready to go within 5 minutes with the character.
Awesome. I know because when we ran those weird World War II games, you gave us some pre-gen characters. Do they have pre-gens available for people that don't know what they're doing?
Yes. So the pre like let's use the Star Wars one as an example, right? With them, it is basically you get a character, and you get there's a character pack. There's I think just a dozen or so various templates. You got bounty hunter, you got Jedi, you got this and that, and you get it, and you got it's a D6 system. So the way that works is, your attribute is your the base number of dice you roll, and then each skill adds an extra D6 or depending on how many points. And basically, they just say, here's your character. Add 7 dice to various skills in the character. No more than 2 dice per skill at start.
Okay.
Right.
So
that's literally all they need out of the gate.
You got a base template, and they can just customize it in a couple of minutes. Yes. So that's it's not difficult to get in. That you're going to have the games are plentiful at these conventions, right?
Yes.
And you can, if you're not experienced in the system or role playing in general, you can still get paired with people that are more experienced, and hopefully the game master and the people playing at the table are there to make it a good time, because the more people involved in the hobby, the more time that we can spend actually playing it.
Yes.
So that sounds great. That sounds like a real nice, easy, low stakes way to learn about the hobby, to get involved in it, and get to experience some of these games that are, either interesting or not as well known, or interesting environments with people that are experienced in it. You're not just, like you said, 12-year-olds in a cabin with a book that you don't know what you're doing. Which, sure, you can absolutely get hooked on things that way, but also seeing the biggest and the brightest can be pretty fun too. Mm-hmm. And it's I would suppose it's probably closer to a real world home session than, say, seeing something that's a little bit more produced, like a Dimension 20 or a Critical Role.
Yeah, no, it definitely has the your standard. I'm hanging out with my friends, drinking soda and having a good time feel, right? Dude,
yeah.
The GMs aren't on microphones and whatnot.
They don't have $1 million sets that you're playing on.
No, they don't. You're lucky if your GM has minis sometimes.
Awesome. So, speaking of the GM, how does one become a GM for a living game?
Well, basically, these living campaigns are all, well, not all of them, but most of them are volunteer based, right? They're bribing volunteers with either free admission to the convention or something like that, or just because they love doing it. But like anything else that requires volunteers, you're always scrambling to find them. And so anyone who's played a while, after a while, you just kind of reach out to them and go like, why don't you run a game? It's rare that the players are the first ones to say, "I want to run." It's usually the person running, the convention, is organized and try to, find 6, 7 judges to actually run for a weekend and go like, "You've done this a while. Why don't you give it a try? Have you run a slot next convention?" And oh, that's
Awesome.
the easiest way to get in.
Excellent. So go to a couple of games, make a name for yourself, and then volunteer. And you're saying they're always looking for volunteers. So that's great. So these are living worlds where there's world history and other bits of story that may have led up to the session. How well versed in the lore of a living world do you need to be in order to run one of these games?
Ooh, that's a tough one because some of these campaigns have run for a long time. The Spark Star Wars game is as far as we know, the longest running living campaign in existence,
Mm.
and it's been around since '96. Right? A lot of the
Wow.
players aren't even alive when that thing started. So yeah, to know how to at least you got the background of the Star Wars universe. Like if you've seen the movies, you know enough, but
They
you
made
can't just
movies?
stick right. But you can't just stick to the movies because you run out of material. So they start creating their own plot lines and that kind of stuff, which run for a while and run to completion or die out or whatever. And so yeah, you get all this stuff and you're like, I don't know about that, and they feel a lot of GMs feel overwhelmed because they don't know all the backstory, and sometimes you just listen. All you need to know is what's in the module, right? And the modules are depending on the size, but they're probably only 12, 15 pages, right? And half of that's
Okay.
stat blocks. It's like you need to know what's in this booklet, and like everything else, if you don't know it, you just look at a player and go, "Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. I can't really work that into the story very well." And
So
most players are okay with that.
basically, what you're saying is you just need the broad brushstrokes of the world, but really it's a one shot and you get to run it and it exists within a certain place. So people that are jumping into this, maybe they've played it before, they're familiar with some of the characters or some of the environment and stuff like that. And so
Yeah, a
well
snapshot
let
in a
me
period of time.
let me flip it on the other side. Um, you're talking about a game that's been running for 30 years, almost 30 years at this point. Uh, how much backstory does the player need to know about that? Or can they just jump in at any time?
So the player, or at least their character, right? They know anything that they learned in a module they played, right? So
Mhm.
within reason, you know what happened in the movies, and you know what happened in the game you played. If you played 2 games, well, you don't know that much. If you played 200 games, well, you know a lot, right? And it's not uncommon to like forget things that you've played, because but they just
It,
sometimes use
yeah.
modules notes like, hey, if this player has played number 14, they know this. Players have to look up, oh, did I play number 14? I don't know, and I don't remember that part, and they played it, and that's just that's
So some of that's
being human.
actually in the module notes then too. So you don't have to
If it's a well-written module, yes.
awesome. Love that. So let's say I'm running one of these sessions, right? Um, are there any special rules? Any like not homebrew, but specific to sort of a living world that may be different from the home version of the same game?
Yes, I yet to find a living campaign that runs rules as written, right? You always have to make some sort of accommodations for a living game. Sometimes it's you gotta keep it certain amount of PG-13ness, right? I know
Ah,
the Shadowrun missions had certain character flaws you weren't allowed to take in your character because you can't role play being a sex addict, for example, without making everyone else uncomfortable. Maybe that's fun for a home game if everybody's on board, but if you're getting people cycling in and out, you can't do that.
mhm. No cannibalism with the children either.
Yeah, that's frowned upon.
Frowned upon.
Well,
Yeah,
but
even though they taste better because they're younger and more
yeah,
tender.
the
Okay.
biggest one is usually character advancement, right? Uh, there's a certain amount of XP or various limits you reach to keep you from either advancing out of control or to make it challenging for you. A lot of systems have like a tiering effect, right? Where so that if you've played a lot of sessions, the bad guys are harder for you specifically than they are for the new guy at the table. Because if they made it everybody too difficult, the new guys will never get to play, and if they make everybody too easy, the big guy will just stomp over everybody. So yeah, you got to find a good balance for that.
Gotcha. So, and that's of course, like you said, if the campaign's well written,
Yes.
if the module's written right. Cool. So if I'm running this game, what happens if I make a bad call?
Well, it happens. I assure you, it happens. Depending on the campaign, there's maybe some sort of review board. I know that Sparks has had that. So they have the Star Wars. They have what's called a dark side points, right? Dark side points is you turn evil and eventually your character turns evil and you lose your character. People get really mad when they get a dark side point. So sometimes if they think it wasn't justified, their action wasn't evil enough in their opinion, they'll petition to like say, hey, I don't think this was fair. And the GM will be reviewed. Sometimes, it happens. You get a GM who's just not very good at running games, and kind of point out to the people that run the campaigns, go, hey, this guy's not good. People weren't having fun, and they got to have a hard conversation with the GM, going like, you either need to learn how to run a game better, or we can't let you run our games.
Okay. So, but there's a review board. So even if it's a minor bad call, not that big of a deal, and you can usually roll with it. But if it's a big bad call, that there's people out there that will make sure that it sort of gets put right. And if you, as the GM, are making bad calls all the time, they're going to come and tell you what you're doing wrong. Okay. I like it. And I'm assuming that you're going to be going to these sessions, you're going to have random people playing at your table. You're probably not going to know your players.
Yes and no, right? So the local conventions, you see the same pool of people show up every time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some guy brings his girlfriend this week, or brings their kid who's now old enough to game. But there's not a lot of new blood. The people at your table will swap out because you're running 3-4 tables concurrently, and everybody jumps between tables at each event. But for the most part, they're the same bodies, right? At large conventions like Gen Con, you don't know anyone at the table. It's 6 or 7 new faces every slot. And honestly, I love running those games the best because it's like home games. Your players start to develop a certain MO, right? They tackle everything the same way, right? And it can get kind of boring as a GM of like, oh, yep, I know what they're going to do. You go to a convention game, the new players, they are not from you, like around you, and man, they tackle the problems in a complete unique ways. You're like, wow, that's awesome.
That's great. That's excellent. So they get to tackle things in unique and interesting ways. What about you as the GM? Do you get to tackle them in unique and interesting ways?
Sure,
Not
I got to
physically,
figure
of
out how to
course.
roll the punches, right? I ran a
Mhm.
World War II game where the players were in Atlantis, right? They had to escape Atlantis. Now, a plan in the module, which I wrote, right, basically said like, they're gonna steal a little like submarine car type thing and like sail away, right? And then the bad guy is gonna chase them. Right? It was a chase scene plan. The players basically went, hey, I got this summoning spell. I want to summon a whale, and they literally like sailed away Pinocchio style. And I'm like, okay, didn't see that
Awesome.
coming. Let's roll with it.
So in more of the corporate modules, is it more restrictive on what you're allowed to do, or are you just allowed to go as long as you hit the story beats?
So the corporate modules are usually they're more restrictive in the end. Usually in the like reward distribution, right? You get
Mm-hmm.
X number of XP or character points for hitting these 3 or 4 benchmarks or whatever. They're only allowed to take this much money after the adventure. They're only allowed to have this much loot. And there's like Pathfinder Society is probably the most egregious on this, in my opinion, where they literally have check boxes that says like, if I took my ring +1, I have to check here, you know, kind of thing. And it's just like it feels very constrained. While a lot of other campaigns, it's like, oh, you found this cool thing that the GM literally invented because you walked into a bar that wasn't planned. Cool, that's fine.
Never done that, by the way. Never just
No,
made stuff up on the fly. No, I don't have several episodes of this podcast directly about that topic. So if you're playing in a module, you're running this module for a group of people, and they've got specific characters, and you're looking through the module, you've read through it, but there's a story beat in there that doesn't make sense for them. Is it cool to make that change?
That is kind of campaign specific as to how hard you need to hit these story beats. I'll give you an example of one where like they had to hit this beat no matter how stupid it was, and I was on the player end of this table. This was a Shadowrun mission that I played where my character, they use the same reoccurring contacts, right? And I knew the contact. And early in the adventure, I'm like, all right, I call this dude. And the GM kind of rolled with, oh, he hems and haws and he doesn't help you at all, right? You go through an hour and a half of story, and then, the story beat required that this guy then call us and, info dump on us to the next plot point. And I'm like, I literally talked to this guy. I'd gone out of my way to develop a relationship with him in character. And like all of that was just ignored because the timing didn't fit. Like, so, sometimes it can be annoying.
Yeah, I could see that. But then also, if you had gotten the information earlier, it would have been, just breaking the flow of the game.
Absolutely. But there's a middle ground, right? The GM could have been like, I'll look into this information for you, right? He could have
And
played
then
it off like,
calls you
I'm going to
back
try to
with
help
it
you.
when it's time.
Exactly,
Like,
right? That's the way
hey,
it could have
I
been done.
got that information for you. Yeah, that's exactly what I probably would have done. You would have done. And so that is more of like what I was talking about, changing the story beat. So it's not. It makes more sense in this sense, in this case, where you've developed the rapport. You're going for the information. He doesn't have it, but he doesn't have it yet.
Mhm.
And maybe they could do a little bit bonus. Like gets a little bit more information, or make sure that you're the one that gets a hold of it. Now with these campaigns, I know you've written a couple. For like the World War II, the weird World War II, and I'm assuming more in some of the more corporate games, inserting your own ideas or things into them is probably a big no-no unless your players get way off the reservation.
Yeah. So the big corporate games are, they're very streamlined because they want everybody to have roughly the same experience at any table. And it's more likely for the person running the game to have never actually played the one they're running. That's not too common with the smaller homebrew games, right? A lot of these campaigns have, rules like you can't run a game until you played through it because, the author usually runs it the first time. The players, get the feel for what the author's going for, right? Is it supposed to be a comedic story? Is it supposed to be a horror story, right? That doesn't necessarily translate to stat blocks, right? But it comes across in the GM's running of the game, and then that drifts out to other players who didn't play under them. You don't always get that in Shadowrun. I have literally gone to conventions, sat down with a GM who's reading the module for the first time as he's running us through it. It's like, okay. And it's not that they're doing a bad job, because actually some of them are good quality GMs. But they're not prepped like, you think they should be.
So it's more about just making sure you know what you're doing, paying attention, following through. Good stuff. It's all good stuff. This is all things that you should be doing if you're, running a home game. If you're running a game with friends, you should be doing the same sorts of things. When you're looking at a group of people you don't know in an environment with more restricted information, I think that it requires a little bit more. Not as much, fly by the seat of your pants, but definitely, knowing what you can work with.
Mhm.
Okay, good. Oh yeah, that the last thing I want to talk about with this before we get into like how is this actually going to make us all better storytellers and game masters. If you've got a situation, let's say, I don't know, you're doing a adventure league and somebody says, "Hey, is it cool if I have silvery barbs?" Can you just say no? Are there
Most
things
of
that
these
you can restrict
campaigns
from these
say
campaigns?
no, right? You gotta
Mhm.
have, there's usually, equipment lists and such that are, standard starting equipment, and then everything else you gotta acquire in game, right? Nobody's gonna like give you crap as if you say like my hat's red and not green, right?
Mhm.
But anything with a mechanical effect that's going to, help or hinder, yeah, it either needs to be on your character sheet when you started, or you need to acquire it over the course of gameplay.
And since these games are the corporate ones, at least, are fairly structured, they're not going to go crazy with what you can acquire.
Right.
Um, and the more regional or small games and stuff like that
Mm.
probably aren't going to be too game breaking in what they put into the systems anyway.
That's actually not true. I wish it was. That's actually one of the bigger
Oh,
problems with the more couture ones, right? You get so many different authors. They all want to make their mark, and they put something into campaign that then proceeds to break things. And then this, oversight council I mentioned earlier has to step in and go, okay, we need to rewind this item or this ability or whatever, because it's either being abused by players in ways that wasn't expected, or maybe not timeline appropriate, right? Star Wars stuff, these guys haven't shown up yet, right? Or things
gotcha.
like that. You can't have Ewoks before you have the Battle of Endor, right? That doesn't make sense. Things like that.
I mean, I'm sure they did exist before the Battle of Endor. They had a
Right, but
whole
like as a
society built
player
there.
character, it's a little off-putting. It doesn't make sense story-wise. And they actually, there's big long arguments people have about that. Of like, yeah, I want to play an Ewok. Who cares if they haven't shown up, right? I just, I showed up, I got on a spaceship, and I joined people. Why is that wrong? And you'll get people go, hard and fast with the canon, and that's why like the smaller
Whatever.
campaigns are like, listen, there's one or two people running it, and as long as they're in agreement, they're great.
Hmm, awesome. Cool. So, I think everything that you've said here is very much in line with what we like to talk about here on this podcast, uh, which is how do we use what we're given to be a better storyteller? And I think that what you said, do your prep work, be willing to roll with the punches. That you know just because you're stuck within sort of the confines of this shared universe with this sort of one-shot modular adventure doesn't mean that you can't still have fun with it. That you should look out for new players, either as the DM, GM, or the players themselves, to help foster the community. That if you're in these big convention games, that you're going to meet a lot of new people and have a lot of interesting things. But even with the small regional games, you might see a lot of the same people, cycle through. You get to know things. Try not to do anything game breaking. Watch for things that could be. Um, don't worry so much about making bad rules. There are people there to sort of roll things back if it gets crazy, but try not to make bad rules. Don't make bad calls. Reach out to the community. Is there anything you think of that I should add to that?
Specifically with convention gaming, time management is critical. This is not a home game where the fight can carry over to the next week, right? And if you
Mhm.
have 4 story beats you need to hit, and like they're critical for the story to make sense, right? They're not. You need to make sure that like this fight that's you know players are already kind of winning. You don't need to fight the last round. You can kind of like say, all right, and then you mop them up and you move on to the next fight. Don't you know you don't
Don't.
have to fight to the last man on every single
Yes.
encounter because it takes forever. And frankly, it can get boring after a while. If you've seen one stormtrooper, you've seen them all, right? So same thing with goblins, right? Okay, I don't need to kill every last goblin. They can run off into the woods and we can move on with our caravan mission or whatnot.
Yes. Aaron always talks about not rolling dice when you don't have to. And I think a big part of that is if you've killed like 3/4 of the goblins,
Hmm.
yeah, if everybody's still healthy, I don't think there's any reason to keep the fight going. Move on. So
Yeah.
I like it. Now you do a lot of these, right? This is your
My gym.
this is your jam. There we go. I was trying to think of something else, maybe some French words, which is weird because I don't know a lot of French.
This is my croissant, yes.
This is definitely your croissant. Do you find the ongoing nature of these stories freeing or restricting?
I don't really find them restricting. I do find them like the storylines can really suck you in. Like I haven't even
Mhm.
mentioned these guys yet, but there's one called the Guild of San Marcos, which runs a 7th Sea game, first edition. And they're by far my favorite of these living campaigns. Like I go to Gen Con, I run my stuff, but then I go run and play theirs, right? As much as I can.
Mhm.
Because the story sucks me in. And so yeah, there's a certain amount of restriction, within the plot, but honestly, if it's well run, a well run, railroad tracks won't let you know you're actually on railroad tracks in a game, right? It may seem like a sandbox, but it's always a railroad because you know where the end destination is going as a GM, and you need to get your players there, even if they don't know they're headed there. And so, yeah, it can be a lot of fun of how you wiggle your way there, but there is a certain restriction of like you need to hit this endpoint, especially in living campaigns where the outcome is sort of predetermined and might affect future events, as opposed to home games where if the players don't beat the big dragon, then the big dragon lives, and that's that, right? But the next adventure might be about like what does the town do with the influx of money from the dragon's hoard? Well, it gotta have slain the dragon in the previous adventure.
Awesome. I like it. Cool. So I think that's going to wrap us up for the week. If somebody wanted to uh, join one of your games, when is the next time you're going to be running one of these things?
So my hope is that there's a local convention called VernCon. Usually runs over New Year's in the Chicagoland area. It's usually in like the suburb of Lisle, if that means anything. And so that's probably the next time I'm going to run my stuff. It'll also be at Gen Con in August of next year, and then I intend to run it a lot at uh, Fire and Ice, which is a convention in Wisconsin. So those are my big three that I always attend, and sometimes I hit a few other conventions along the way.
Nice. Excellent. Is there anything you'd like to add today?
Just that look out for the local small conventions, right? Like I said, they haven't really bounced back that great since Gen Con, and so like if those that are there are like tried and true gamers, and if you're looking for like in-person gaming again, that's where you got to go. Because they could use the new blood, they could use some new people to play with. I know I could use new people to play with, and frankly, it's a really fun community to be a part of.
Yeah. I think that if you're trying to aspire to be a better game teller, a story master, game master, storyteller. Wow, I got all those words wrong together.
Yep.
If you're looking to be better at telling stories and running your own games, it's always a good idea to see how other people are doing it.
That's absolutely true. You will play under so many different GMs of varying qualities that you will learn so much, both from their amazing successes and their occasional flubs, right? And you'll become When I first started GMing, I was one of those GM versus the player types. I was a bad GM, I admit it, right? I started doing the living campaigns and conventions and stuff, and I realized, oh wait, this is more of a cooperative story game, and that is so much more enjoyable for everybody that I eventually, I turned on a dime and never looked back.
Yep. Everybody always accuses me of being a hostile GM, but people live through my campaigns. Not often, but they do.
Players don't. I mean, the characters don't, but the players do.
Okay. Thank you again, DJ, for coming in and talking with me. Maybe we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Thank you much.
Thank you.
If you have anything you'd like to ask us regarding this topic or another that might be near and dear to your heart, please feel free to drop us a line at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com or head on over to facebook.com/levelupyourgaming. The podcast is also available on YouTube, so check that out, like and subscribe. As always, if you liked what we talked about today or think someone you know would benefit from our worldly advice, please share this with them. We are here to help and would love to hear from you. This is not the end, but I've got nothing more to say. Bye.